the strength of a hurricane, but you came like a winter snow, quiet and soft and slow, falling from the sky in the night to the earth below.
Well, that absolutely went for a weird change, as the sun is actually starting to come out here for a second. We have not seen the sun in quite a while, and it's amazing what the sun can do for your overall mood. The last few days I've just been so dragging and kind of just having difficulty getting going on a lot of things. But as you can see here, we still have our striping pattern pretty much burned into there. This perennial ryegrass, although it does like the cool weather, it doesn't necessarily grow extremely fast. And with all this sort of crazy weather that we've been having, it really hasn't done a whole lot. So I haven't had to mow that now for a while. This bluegrass over here, it's been growing just slightly more than the rye, so I'll probably do a quick mow on this today. I was planning on doing a quick mow on this over here. Make sure if you have in-ground irrigation, you begin to think about getting the water out of that. I'm having mine done tomorrow. That's something end of year here you need to be thinking about, because as our ground starts to freeze, which usually would be typically a lot later, but you just never know what's going to happen. You don't want water sitting in those pipes underground, or you can crack some things and just cause some damage. So I think I want to do a recap here of some of my projects, and also talk about Winterizer and sort of the plan for that this year, or sort of what is Winterizer and sort of the traditional thinking on it years ago, and what the new research is showing here as well. Well, I'm certainly going to miss that. We get to the end of every season here, and definitely the last couple reel mows are the hardest ones, just because I enjoy it so much, and I know that I'm going to have to sit here and look at a brown or snow-covered yard here until we get to come back next season and do it all over again, but it's just how it goes. So I wanted to show you what the results were out here so far. The last time I was out here, it was only about a month into it, and remember that we don't have any irrigation other than natural irrigation, and so we were pretty impressed with the results. Now that I'm back out here again today, I can see that things have filled in even better. Paul has done his first mow. Things are looking fantastic right now for how far along we are, and a new yard with basically no other irrigation other than just some natural rainfall, which we haven't had a lot of. So I'm impressed with the results. The main thing I guess I'd noticed so far is that you'll see some differences in the color. Now some of this is the grass that is less mature, and some of it is the grass that's more mature. And also remember that there was some bluegrass mixed into this. There's like I'd have to look at the tag again, but I think it was either 10 or less than 20%, I believe. I'm looking at this closely now, and I'm seeing some of that bluegrass has started to creep into these areas where it might have been a little more bare, or also, as you know, bluegrass is the slowest grass to come in compared to this fescue that was up and going pretty easily. So that's really what's giving you the color difference at this point, but it's a pretty good sign though that all this is going to be covered next year, and we're going to have an even nice yard across here. Remember, we seeded roughly 80,000 square feet, and to say that most of this has good coverage for the most part, that's pretty amazing. Now there's a few sections out here where you're still finding some weeds. This looks just like a little more crabgrass or foxtail that came back through. There was a ton of it out here, and remember that we tilled all this stuff up, so I'm not surprised by that. But this will all die off in the winter time, and then next spring it's essential that we get some sort of pre-emergent down to prevent all this stuff from coming in. But for the most part, because the grass has already established itself so well and it's getting fairly thick, it's going to crowd out a lot of those weeds. This will be mowed between 3 and 4 inches probably out here, and that's going to do a good job as well to crowd out a bunch of the weeds. So I'm not really worried about any of this stuff. I'm happy with the results so far. Despite a few of these weeds coming in, not a big deal. And I know a lot of you have been wondering, what does this fescue look like? I'm going to be showing the same thing on my yard so far, what the fescue looks like, but this is not the old style fescue that you might be used to when you're thinking of a super thick blade. This is actually a pretty fine leaf, and the texture is good, it's soft. If I were shown this right next to bluegrass, I would have a very tough time figuring out which one was which. Now, it has maybe a slightly rougher texture to it, but overall, as far as how fine the leaf blades are, and as far as how this should do much better to get through the heat and drought resistance and all that stuff compared to the bluegrass that obviously needs a lot of water to survive and goes dormant pretty fast. I'm pretty happy to see how this is looking. So you probably remember this section up here was where the straw was at. This is a section that Paul also watered, so it's a little thicker than the other areas out there. It's a little more mature at this point, but honestly, that area over there that didn't have any straw has come in very well and isn't that much different than this section at this point. But some of this straw is still in here. That's gonna start breaking down. It's gonna take a little bit of time, kind of get caught up in the mower and chewed up eventually too. Any of these sections, if there's really thick sections that you notice, you can go out there and pick up some of that straw if you'd like to, but I think about a week ago or so he did the first mow out through here and looks good. So our plan for any of those sections out in the front that are a little bit thinner, we're probably going to put some seed on before the winter hits and do more of a dormant seeding, which is just letting the freeze and the frost kind of pull that into the ground and then let it just germinate in the spring. We have to time our pre-emergent right in the spring so that we figure that out. We need the grass to come up and then make sure that we don't put pre-emergent down too soon to prevent that grass seed. We can kind of work on that next year. We'll talk about that, but that's the plan going forward. Very happy so far with the results. I think I'm gonna have to get on that zero turn next year for sure. All right, so I have my partner in crime from the Turfcast podcast here joining me today to talk a little bit about winterizing. We're going to try to keep this short here to give you some information on winterizing. I've been getting a lot of questions about that. So, when it comes to winterizing and cool season turf, I think people have been sort of thinking about different methods with that. So I wanted to talk to you about sort of your experience with it, maybe some of the research that was done in the past few years on that and sort of what you've been seeing. So maybe the old school method that was going on with winterizing, and then maybe what the research has been showing recently.
Yeah, so the old school thinking is from a study that came out from the University of Kentucky back in the late 60s. And what they found was that a late season application very close to the end of the year. So again, about Thanksgiving time or so for our folks here in the Midwest, over to the Northeast, and cool season grass, that with a fast release fertilizer at a high rate of say 1 to 1.5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, they were seeing a tremendous response in the greening over the winter and then all the way through the next spring. So fast forward, nobody really looked at this. They just accepted it, and it was good science at the time, but nobody really investigated any further until about 10 years ago. And so some folks at the University of Wisconsin in Madison decided they wanted to take a look at this and figure out, is this the most efficient way for us to get late season nitrogen into the plant, okay? And so what they did was they made applications in September, October, and November. And they looked at that in terms of how much nitrogen is actually getting into the plant. So the idea was that as we pull nitrogen up into the plant in September, we were 88% less efficient in November in doing that same app. Meaning only 12% of that nitrogen that they were putting down in November was actually getting into the plant. And looking at this Wisconsin study and seeing that we're 88% less effective in November, their recommendation was go ahead and put out an application, a 50% slow release product or thereabouts at a rate of 0.5 pound per 1,000 of nitrogen, and put that down sometime in our area, again going from the eastern seaboard and the Northeast all the way out to Iowa and effective where you are. Basically anytime between about September 15th and October 15th, and adjusting for how far north or south you are on that. So later if you're further south, a little bit earlier if you're north, okay? That's the easy button approach, and there's certainly different ways that you can do it and make it a little bit more customized from there. And really all that pertains to is just smaller doses of nitrogen and kind of weaning those off as you get closer and closer to, say, that Thanksgiving date. So you can use fast release nitrogen in that case, and going out at, say, like a 1/4 pound to start in September, and maybe going every 2 weeks or so and just bumping it along. But as you get into the middle of October and then into November and into mid-November, you're backing down your rates, or you're lengthening out your frequency just a little bit, knowing that, again, the later you go, the less efficient you are with what's coming out. That's kind of the two schools of thought, but it is the most important fertilization application that you're going to make the entire year. It's crucially beneficial for root development for the following year, and also for just plant health over the winter time too. So something to consider and think about. Again, looking at that, if you're going to make one application, it would be right about now. I know we're a little bit late on some of these things, but if you back down that rate now and go out with a slow release product, you can make that happen.
So we'll be talking more in depth about Winterizer, and also I want to talk about some dormant seeding methods coming into this winter season. So that's all going to be coming up on our next Turfcast podcast, which will be hopefully recording very soon. So be sure to check that out. I have a link here in the description to check that out. You can go straight to my website, and there's a podcast section up at the top as well. So thanks so much, Ryan, for joining us here today and talking a little bit about some of the old school thinking on Winterizer, some of the new research that's been done. Appreciate it a lot.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Have a great day.
Let's take a final look here over at the neighbor's project. And remember that this was seeded just at the start of August this year. So overall, considering all of the difficulties we had this year with drought, and the fact that this thing has nearly the whole thing has just been watered with sprinklers, and we didn't have much rain help at all, this thing looks really good here for how far along we are. Some of the bluegrass from our overseed that we did is still not quite there in terms of growth compared to the rest of the yard. It's still kind of lagging along. Very typical of bluegrass, no problem with that. From where we were just a few months ago to where we are right now, the consistency of color is much better. The consistency of the grass is much better, and that's what we were trying to fix here, was that we had a really patchy type of look. There was a lot of dark areas, there was a lot of light areas. This is now one big uniform piece. It looks great. So what I'm talking about with that bluegrass, you'll see some of these pieces right in here. Some of this stuff that still looks patchy. There's definitely bluegrass in here on that overseed that came in. But bluegrass will have no problem filling in a section like that as the next spring we get back into the spring flush of growth and things really want to start moving. If you keep up with your mowing in the spring especially, you're going to be able to fill in these spots, and that's not going to be an issue at all. So some of this grass in here just never got extremely mature before we got to a lot less sunlight and a lot of cold actually that just happened in the last couple weeks, which is very uncommon for it to be this cold, but you just never know what's going to happen. Same thing right in here. You'll see some of these more lime green sections, and I showed them the last time that I did an update, but that's just very young bluegrass. It definitely did its job when we did the overseed and filled in those bare spots that were still here. It just hasn't had much of a chance to get really going during thriving weather. So that'll all come next season. Absolute same thing going on over in here, just a slight bit of patchiness that will all fill itself in once you get into spring flush. So with some hard work and keeping at things there, you can see what you can do in just a few months. So how about a look at the tall fescue and where we're at so far? This was seeded on Labor Day this year, which I believe was September 7th, somewhere around there. So we're not nearly as far into this thing as we are over on my neighbor's yard here. So my initial thoughts here is that this thing has come in probably better than I expected it would, as far as having even coverage on everything and having a fairly decent yard here for how long it's been since this has been seeded. At this point though, I think I definitely have good enough results going into next season. Everything should be thriving and looking good. From a distance and even somewhat closer, this does not look that much different than the bluegrass that I had. So you should be able to definitely see here kind of the texture of how things look. I'll show you some of the old fescue and we can compare those two, but for the most part, this newer stuff, the texture is not exactly the same as the bluegrass is, but it's still soft and still what you would expect from cool season grass. If it survives the summer, much better, less water, it's going to be a win for me, because I had difficulty every single year with so much heat back here in terms of my bluegrass, and we get plenty of hot weather here to where it just doesn't do well in that much extreme sun without having a lot of water on it. It'll give me an opportunity to just see that. Fescue right next to the same bluegrass. So here's a patch right here of the old style fescue, the really thick bladed stuff. So if you can compare here a piece of this leaf. So this has a much more coarse feel to it too. This is a lot softer. This is some of that clumping fescue look a lot of you do not like, and I don't either, because if everything was consistently a look like this, then it wouldn't be so bad. But because you've got bluegrass in here, a much finer leaf, and then you just got this clump of stuff, it just doesn't match together. It doesn't really look good. And finally, of course, you've seen plenty of the ryegrass recently in some of the videos, but still holding its color as it does very well into the cold. Recovery after the sand this year was amazing. I did that overseeding. I think right now the grass is probably as thick as it's ever been in terms of cutting it at 1/2 inch and really having great density there. It's taken me about 3 seasons here of overseeding, and I've never killed off this yard completely, so it's taken me about 3 seasons of pretty strong leveling work, pretty strong overseeding to get it to looking like this. But obviously you put in that work and these are the results that you'll find. I'll be continuing to do top dressings next year. That's all in the plans, and just keep moving on and working on this thing. Year by year, it just seems to get better and better. So unfortunately, there's just not a whole lot of season left here, but that's just how it works. I'll be talking about putting away some of my equipment, what I do with that, kind of where to store some things coming up. So obviously, I do not have a heated shed, so all of that will be coming up, kind of what I do to get ready for the winter time. But thank you so much today for watching this video. We'll see you next time. Well, that definitely got frozen quickly.